I've been locked in my apartment for 3 weeks now. Outside, the city is dead, the wind blowing empty shopping bags across the asphalt. The virus has killed almost everyone. But the worst part is, the infected haven't died. They've changed. Now they walk the streets, gather in groups, look out the windows. And this morning, I saw my neighbor among them. He stood and looked straight at me. And smiled. He had no eyes. My name is Alex, I'm 32, and I work as a system administrator at a small IT company. Before all this started, I lived a normal life. Work, home, occasional meetings with friends, beer on Fridays. Now, there are no friends. The city has turned into a trap. It all started 3 months ago. News was on TV about a strange disease in China. People were coughing up blood. Their temperatures were almost 38 degrees Celsius. Then they died. A typical news story. A week later, the virus appeared in Europe. 2 weeks later in New York. Then they declared a quarantine. On the very first day, I stocked up on groceries. Pasta, cereal, canned goods, water. Smart people online advised me to prepare for the worst. I listened. My friends laughed, calling me alarmist. A week later, they stopped replying to my messages. At first, everything was quiet. I stayed at home, working remotely, watching TV shows, and video chatting with my mom. She lived in another city, and I was worried. Mom said they were also in quarantine, but for now, everything was calm. And then the connection went dead. The phone stopped working, and the internet was shut down a couple of days later. All that remained was the radio, which broadcast strange things. Avoid contact, don't go outside, the infected don't die. I didn't understand what "don't die" meant. I thought it was a translation error, journalistic nonsense. It turned out to be true. The neighbor upstairs, Mr. Henderson, an elderly man in his 70s, was one of the first to get sick. I could hear his cough through the ceiling, a dull, dry, piercing sound. He coughed for 3 days, and then there was silence. I thought he was dead. But on the 4th night, I heard footsteps. Heavy, shuffling, above me. Someone had been pacing back and forth all night. I didn't sleep. I lay there and listened to something heavy moving above me. And by morning, the footsteps had faded. I looked out the window. The street was empty, only wind and snow. But Mr. Henderson was sitting on a bench by the entrance. In a robe and slippers, despite the cold. He sat motionless, staring straight into my window. I recoiled. His eyes were white as boiled fish. Another 2 weeks passed. I stopped leaving the house altogether. We were running out of food, but there was still water. I saved money and ate once a day. The radio said the virus attacks the brain, forcing the infected to seek out survivors. They don't sleep, don't eat, just wander and wait. And learn. They learn to open doors, climb ladders, recognize voices. I saw them every day from the window. They gathered in groups at intersections, standing silently, like statues. Sometimes one of them would turn his head and look in my direction. I covered the windows with blankets, but they still knew I was there. This morning, I peeked through a crack in the window. It was gray and frosty outside. Across the street, by a lamppost, stood a group. About 10 people. I looked closer and recognized Mr. Henderson. He stood in the front row, looking up at my window. He had no eyes. Only dark pits from which black liquid oozed. But he looked. And smiled. The others looked up too. And smiled. I closed the crack and sat on the floor. My heart was pounding so hard you could probably hear it even on the stairs. They know. They will come. The only question is when. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat in the corner of the room, clutching a baseball bat to my chest, and listened. The wind howled outside, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then the barking stopped. The silence grew thick as jelly. I stared at the door, expecting the handle to shake. But no one came. Not that night, nor the next. The infected continued to stand outside, and now there were more of them. I counted about 30 figures frozen around the house. They didn't move, only occasionally turning their heads, watching something I couldn't see. Mr. Henderson still stood in the front row, his empty eye sockets staring at my window. I stopped going to the window altogether. I covered all the cracks with blankets, turned on the dim light in the kitchen, and tried to be quiet. We were running low on food. The bottled water was almost gone, so I had to get it from the tap, even though I was afraid the virus might be in the water supply. But dying of thirst would be worse. On the 5th day of my isolation, the battery-powered radio broadcast a strange message. A woman's voice, distorted by static, said, "If you hear this, don't go outside. They hear sounds. They react to voices. Lock the doors, seal the cracks. And don't believe what you see. They can take the form of your loved ones. They remember. They learn." I turned off the radio and sat for a long time, processing what I'd heard. They take the form of your loved ones. So Mr. Henderson wasn't Mr. Henderson? Or was he, but changed? And what does remember and learn mean? That thought was the most terrifying of all. If they learn, it means they're getting smarter. It means they'll find a way to get inside. That night, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, heavy, they rose from the first floor. I froze, listening. The footsteps came closer, stopped at my door. Silence. Then a soft knock. Knock, knock. Knock, knock. I held my breath. The knock came again, more insistently. And then a voice. My mother's voice. "Alex, son, open up. It's me. I've come to you. I was evacuated. I made it. Please, open up." A chill ran through me. My mother lived 300 miles from here. She couldn't come. She didn't even know my address. And the voice, it sounded like hers, but with a strange echo, like from a deep well. I didn't answer. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. And the voice continued. "Alex, I'm cold. It's dark in here. Let me in. I'm your mother. You love me, right? Open up." The knocking grew louder, turning into dull thuds. The door shook, but held. I heard the scraping of nails on wood, as if someone was trying to peer through the keyhole. It lasted for an eternity. And then, toward morning, everything went silent. I crawled to the door and put my ear to it. Silence. I cautiously peered through the peephole. There was no one on the landing, only a dark puddle on the floor, like oil or something else. During the day, I looked out the window. The infected were still standing below. But now they were looking not at my window, but at the entrance. Every single one of them. And Mr. Henderson was among them. But when I looked closer, I noticed another figure next to him. A woman, small, gray-haired, wearing a coat I recognized. My mother's coat. She stood with her head raised, looking straight at me. She had no eyes, only black voids. I recoiled and fell to the floor. I vomited. Then I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it wasn't her, that it was simply a creature in her form. But that didn't make it any easier, because if they can take the form of those we love, then they were already inside us. They knew our fears, our memories, our faces. That evening, the radio started talking again. The same female voice, now even quieter, even more distorted. "If you hear this, don't open it to anyone. Even if they look like your children, your parents, your friends. It's not them. They're gone. Only shells remain. And hunger. They're hungry. They want warmth. Don't let them fool you. And remember, they hear thoughts. They're already here. I turned off the radio and looked at the door. It was quiet behind it, but I knew they were there, waiting, learning, and soon they will come again. I don't know how much time passed. The days merged into one endless nightmare. I stopped looking at the clock, even closing it so I wouldn't see the slowly moving hands. I ate once a day, drank water in small sips, saving every drop. The batteries in the radio were dying. The voices were getting quieter, but I could still catch snatches of broadcasts. On the 7th night, they returned. First, I heard whispers. Many voices, intertwining, calling each other's names. They came from the vents, from the cracks under the door, from the walls. I covered my ears with a pillow, but the whispers penetrated my head, making my heart beat faster. Alex, come out to us. We're cold, Alex. We want to play. Your mother is here, she's waiting. I jumped up and started pacing the room, not knowing where to hide from these voices. I grabbed the bat, pressed myself into the corner, and closed my eyes. But they didn't subside. On the contrary, they grew louder, more insistent. I began to distinguish individual voices. My neighbor, Mrs. Green, who always bought me cookies. Mike, the mailman, with whom I chatted about football. My childhood friend, Tom, who died in a car accident 5 years ago. And Mom. Mom's voice was louder than all. Son, open up. I've come for you. It's nice here, it doesn't hurt. You're tired, you're hungry. We'll be together forever. I opened my eyes. There was no one in the room, just me and the shadows. But when I looked at the door, I saw the handle slowly turning. On its own. I screamed, rushed to the door, grabbed the handle, and held it with all my might. Someone was pushing hard, rhythmically, from the other side. Then the pushing stopped, and the handle stopped. I stood with my back to the door, hearing heavy breathing behind it. Not just one, but many. They were standing in the hallway, waiting. In the morning, the voices faded. I looked out the window. A huge crowd had gathered below, at the entrance. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people stood motionless, looking up. All of them were looking at my house, at my window. And among them, I saw not only Mr. Henderson and my mother, but other people I knew. Co-workers, the guy from the coffee shop where I got my coffee every morning, even a girl I dated a couple of years ago. They were all here. Dead and infected, they had gathered beneath my windows to wait. Patiently, endlessly, until I got out or died of starvation. I moved away from the window and sat on the floor. My thoughts were jumbled. I remembered the words from the radio. They remember. They learn. If they remember, then they know who I am, where I live, what I'm afraid of. If they're learning, they'll sooner or later find a way to get inside. That night, I decided not to give up. I gathered up the remains of my food, filled the water bottles, checked all the locks. Then I sat in the corner and waited. Waited for them to come again. They came. And this time, it wasn't just a knock. I heard a crash from below. Someone was pounding on the front door. The metal door, which I always locked at night, shook from the blows. I ran to the window and looked out. The crowd below was moving. They weren't just standing there anymore. They were moving, surrounding the front door, climbing the eaves, trying to grab onto the walls. The crash grew louder. The front door gave way. I heard the creak of metal, then a fall, and the clatter of feet on the stairs. Hundreds of feet running up. I rushed around the apartment. There was no way out. Only the balcony, but on the 6th floor. I rushed to the balcony door, opened it, and peered down. They were there too. Standing on the floor, heads raised, watching. their arms stretched upward like tree branches. The footsteps were approaching. There they were, on the second, third, fourth floors. I heard doors being kicked down, the screams of those still hiding in the other apartments. The screams quickly died down, replaced by silence. My door shook from the first blow. I jumped back to the center of the room, clutching the bat. A second blow, a third. The door creaked, but held. I looked at the window, at the balcony, at the emptiness beyond, and I made a decision. I ran and jumped out the window. The glass shattered, shards cut my face and hands, but I felt no pain. I fell down, into a crowd of outstretched hands, into empty eye sockets, into a black abyss. And then the impact. Darkness. I woke up cold. My whole body ached, and every breath sent a pain through my chest. I tried to open my eyes, but they felt glued to them. Somewhere nearby, water was dripping. Drip, drip, drip. A continuous, rhythmic sound that made me want to sink back into the darkness. I forced myself to open my eyes. Above me was a gray, cracked concrete ceiling. I was lying on something soft and moldy. I tried to move and almost screamed from the pain in my right leg. It was twisted unnaturally, and a white bone protruded from the wound. But I didn't scream, because someone was nearby. I turned my head and saw them. 3 infected stood 2 meters away from me, motionless as statues. Their empty faces were turned towards me, the black holes in their eyes staring straight into my soul. I froze, afraid to breathe. Now they'll pounce, tear me apart, eat me. But they didn't move. They simply stood and watched. And suddenly, the tallest of them slowly raised his hand and pointed somewhere into the darkness. The gesture was almost human, almost meaningful. I couldn't believe my eyes. They weren't attacking. They were waiting. Or were they guarding? Or was I already one of them? I looked at my hands. They were covered in blood, but the blood was dark, almost black. And strange blue veins appeared on my skin that weren't there before. I ran my tongue over my teeth and almost screamed. One fang grew longer, sharper. I froze. Maybe it's the virus. Maybe I'm infected too. Silence. Only the dripping of water. I tried to sit up, propping myself up on my elbows. The infected weren't moving. I looked at my leg. The bone was sticking out, but there was almost no blood. And the edges of the wound looked strange, as if they were starting to heal. This can't be happening. Not in a few hours. I get it. The virus didn't kill me. It changed me. I became one of them. But why am I thinking? Why do I remember myself, my mother, my apartment? Why do I feel pain? Footsteps broke the silence. Someone was walking down the wet hallway. The infected parted, making way. A figure emerged from the darkness. A young woman in tattered clothes. She had eyes. Living, human eyes. She looked at me and smiled. "You're awake," she said. "Good. I thought you wouldn't survive. Falling from the 6th floor kills even us." I looked at her with confusion. She came closer and crouched next to me. Her hand touched my leg, and I shuddered. Her fingers were warm. "Who are you?" I whispered. "My name is Nina. I'm just like you. We're not dead. We've changed. And now we have to stick together. Otherwise, they'll find us." She nodded toward the infected by the wall. "Are they listening to you?" I asked. Nina shook her head. "They're not listening. They're waiting. They sense that we're different. They don't attack, but they don't help either. They're simply observing and learning. We're a mystery to them." I tried to stand, leaning on her shoulder. My leg hurt, but I managed to take a step. The bone was no longer sticking out, the wound healing before my eyes. "What's wrong with us?" I asked. "The virus has mutated," Nina answered. "In most, it kills the brain, leaving only instincts. In some, like us, it awakens something else. We become faster, stronger, regenerate. But we don't lose ourselves. The only question is how long this will last." She led me deeper into the basement. We passed the infected, who stared at us with empty eye sockets. At the end of the corridor was an iron door. Nina opened it, and we entered a small room with cots, candles, and food supplies. "My shelter," she said. "It's safe here. They don't come here." I sat down on the bunk and looked at her. Nina was beautiful, despite the dirt and fatigue. Her eyes showed weariness, but also hope. "How many of us are here?" I asked. "I know 5 more. They're in different parts of the city. We're trying to contact them, but it's difficult. The infected are getting smarter. They're learning faster than we thought." She told me the virus continues to evolve. The infected are starting to act together, set traps, even imitate human voices. They prey not only on the healthy, but also on people like us. Why? Nina didn't know. Maybe they sense competition. Maybe they want to explore it. "We need to get out of the city," she said. "There's an area on the outskirts where they say the military is taking up defensive positions. It's clear. We can start a new life there." I looked at my hands. Blue veins pulsed beneath my skin. I felt an unprecedented strength, but also a strange connection with those standing behind the door, as if they were a part of me, and I was a part of them. "I'll come with you," I said. We spent 3 days in Nina's shelter. During that time, my leg had completely healed, leaving only a pink scar. The blue veins on my arms became more visible, but I was no longer afraid of them. Nina taught me to control my new senses. Heightened hearing, night vision, a danger sense that activated a second before the infected approached the door. She said she'd found other surviving mutants through notes left in certain places. There was a whole network of people like us operating in the city. They called themselves the Second Wave, and believed the virus wasn't a curse, but evolution. A chance for humanity to become something more. I didn't know whether to believe it. Too much death, too much pain. But there was no choice. There was no turning back. On the 4th night, we decided to move on. Nina said she calculated the war zone to be 10 miles north of the city. If you move quickly, you can get there overnight. Daytime is dangerous. The infected are more active and aggressive. We gathered up the remains of food and water and grabbed our weapons. Nina gave me an army knife and showed me how to use it. "Not against people, but against them," she said. "But it's better not to fight. Run." We exited the basement through an old tunnel that led directly to the street. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind clouds. The city lay dead, only the wind blew through the ruined streets. The infected stood in groups at intersections, but we avoided them, using our new senses. I could feel their presence 100 meters away, like a cold breeze on the back of my neck. We walked quickly, almost running. Destroyed houses, overturned cars, corpses that no one had removed. The city had turned into a cemetery. Dawn was just beginning to break in the east when we reached the outskirts. Ahead lay a wide strip of wasteland, and beyond that, a forest. "There, beyond the forest," Nina said, pointing. "A military base. I saw searchlights last night." We made our final dash across the wasteland. And suddenly I sensed danger. Sharp as a knife blade. I grabbed Nina's arm and abruptly pulled her to the ground. A bullet whistled over our heads. We fell into the mud, flattened. Behind us, from the city, we heard footsteps. Dozens, hundreds of them. The infected were running after us. But they weren't the ones shooting. I looked up and saw people in camouflage ahead, at the edge of the forest. Soldiers. They were aiming at us, ready to shoot again. "Don't move," Nina whispered. "They'll mistake us for infected." I froze, my heart pounding. The infected were getting closer. The soldiers hesitated, and we found ourselves caught between two fires, with no choice. Nina suddenly stood up, raising her hands. "We're not infected," she screamed. "We're mutants. We're sane. Don't shoot." The soldiers froze. One of them, apparently the commander, lowered his rifle and came closer, peering into our faces. Then he turned his gaze to the fleeing crowd of infected. "Run toward us," he shouted. We ran as fast as we could. The soldiers opened fire over our heads, holding back the crowd. We reached the forest and hid behind an armored personnel carrier. Bullets whistled. The infected screamed inhumanly. And then there was an explosion. Someone had thrown a grenade. When the smoke cleared, the crowd retreated. The infected were afraid of the fire. The soldiers helped us up and led us deeper into the camp. There, the doctors examined us, took samples, and asked hundreds of questions. We told them everything, about the virus, the changes, the other mutants in the city. The base commander, a colonel with tired eyes, listened silently and then said, "You are the first to retain your sanity. The rest are either dead or have turned into these creatures. We thought there was no way out. Now I see there is hope." They left us in the camp. We were given food, clothing, and a separate tent. We were monitored, but not kept in cages. Scientists studied us, drew blood, trying to understand why the virus behaved differently. A month passed. I got used to my new life. Nina became my closest person, the only one who understood my feelings. We stuck together, supporting each other. One night, we stood by the fence and looked out at the city. There, in the darkness, a few lights burned. The infected didn't leave, they waited. But now they knew we were here. Sometimes I heard their mental calls, vague as an echo. They were calling us back. They said we belonged to them, that we were meant to be with them. I didn't answer. But deep down, I felt the connection was not broken, that we were part of something greater, and that one day we would have to choose. Stay with the humans or go to those who had become our new family. Nina squeezed my hand. "Don't listen to them," she said. I nodded, but I wasn't sure. After all, Mr. Henderson was still there, in the city, and Mom, and all those who had once been humans. And now they were just waiting for our return.